Hello, Applewhite family. This is Gary Johnson coming to you again to discuss our third component of this How to Communicate and Connect series of webinars. And just as a recap, wanted to talk to you briefly about some of the things we've covered in the past. We have covered two different series so far. In the first one, we talked about principle number one. We must first seek to understand those around us before we worry about being understood. A lot of times in conversations, it's the other way. It's seeking to be understood versus understand, and that's not what connectors do. Connectors do the opposite. They really want to understand their audience. They really want to truly understand the person they're communicating with, so that therefore they connect. That is principle number one. Principle number two that we covered was remembering that hurting people hurt people. So people that come in to the office, there's many reasons why they could be aggravated or upset by things we might say to them or the ways we might interact with them. But there are many times they come into our office and they're already fired up or upset, which has nothing to do with us. We talked about how to defuse those situations, how to use Dr. Goulston's steps to do so. So we've talked about that as well. Now, lastly, the last component of how to connect and how to communicate, how to do that really, really well, is this principle number three that you see bold, and that is cultivating relationships. So we're going to talk about what cultivating looks like. We're going to give you some examples I hopefully that you'll identify with. But before we do that, I want to establish right up front some team leaders in your practice, because we're going to jump right into a discussion. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like you guys all to break into teams again, and this time the person that will be the team leader, the person on your team that will be the team leader, is a person currently driving the oldest car to work every day. So let's figure out real quick who that is. I'll give you about a minute, and we'll come back and we'll figure out our team leaders. Okay, hopefully you've gotten that down. Hopefully you guys have figured out who's driving the oldest car. Just so you guys all know, the record so far is 1991. I've had someone driving a 1991 Honda Civic. Some of you out in the audience weren't even born in 1991 and probably didn't even know they made cars in 1991, but they did. And so hopefully we've got our team leaders established, and we're going to get into jumping right into an exercise here. What I want you to do, team leaders, just a reminder, it's the same thing I've asked you to do each and every time. Spokesperson, scribe for your group. You guys talk about what you're going to talk about. I'll give you some feedback that the general audience has said, and then you guys will debrief at the end of this meeting and talk about what you jotted down. So here's what I want to know. In terms of relationships, when you look at a relationship, what things cause a relationship to deteriorate? So what can cause it? So I want you guys in a group to talk about that. So think about any kind of a relationship: patient relationship, team relationship, husband and wife relationship, whatever. What can cause a relationship, or what tends to cause a relationship to deteriorate? So I'm going to give you about 3 to 5 minutes to work on that. Then I'll come back and get your feedback. But team leaders, get people on your team to tell you what causes relationships to deteriorate. Then we'll come back and discuss it. Okay, everybody, I tried to give you a couple minutes there to talk about relationships, and I know this one's usually one that takes a lot of time to go through, so we're going to talk about it together. But what can cause a relationship to deteriorate? What are some things that can cause it? I get lots of answers on this. We're going to go over what some of those are. But first and foremost, as we do that, and I know you guys all have your list as well, we have found in relationships that a lack of trust or a breakdown in trust can be one of the most impactful when it comes to a relationship breaking down. So whether that trust was violated, whether that trust was broken, it can be one of the most powerful, most difficult things to overcome in a relationship. So I'm sure many of you have jotted that down. But let's look at some other things that can cause a relationship to deteriorate. We're looking at move this out of your way here a little bit. We're looking at apathy. Apathy is a big thing that can cause relationships to deteriorate. Taking the other person for granted, a lack of effort, putting situations ahead of relationships. Stop listening, stop asking. This is a big one that you'll hear from marriage counselors when you talk about, what causes relationships to break down. Most of the time when you interview these marriage counselors, they'll tell you that this is one of the big ones. When you guys were dating out there in the audience with your significant other, your spouse, everything was all a rose garden in the courting stage. You wanted to know what you did that morning and what you had for a snack and what TV shows you watched and what you did in the afternoon and what you had for dinner and what kind of toothpaste you used to brush your teeth. I mean, that was kind of the way it was in the courting stage, was that process, or that deep of a relationship, and you would ask how their day was, and you listened intently, and then you got married and didn't ask as much, didn't ask as much about the day or what was happening, and it kind of went from when you were courting to, oh my gosh, it's you, to being married for a few years, which became, oh, it's you, and then potentially 15 or 20 years into the relationship, where it became, oh, it's you. And it doesn't have to be that way. We're going to talk about that today. Dr. Terry Paulson's going to give us some ways to make sure it doesn't become the latter and stays the former. So we're going to talk about that. Another situation that can cause relationships to deteriorate is too many withdrawals from the emotional bank account. And I want to tell you a little bit about this that may sound familiar to some of you. Where that comes from is Stephen Covey wrote a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about this emotional bank account, and that we all have one, and that whether we're talking about your teammate, or we're talking about a patient, or we're talking about your doctor, or we're talking about your family member, we all have emotional bank accounts at which we operate, and the more positive things that we put in there in terms of experiences, the more likely it is that I would be able to get away with a negative experience with you, or vice versa. The problem becomes when your withdrawals, the negative experiences outweigh the positive ones. That's when we run into a challenge in the relationship, or we start to see that relationship fade away. And so we want to be very, very careful with that. And we need more deposits than withdrawals, many more, in order for that relationship to be fruitful and to maintain itself over time. One of the things I can tell you, and I've been fortunate enough to be married going on my 26th year, is that relationships take work, and they take effort, and they take patience, and they take understanding, and they take you as an individual being willing to sacrifice certain things in order for the relationship to prosper. And it's the same whether we're talking about our patient, or we're talking about our staff member that we work with, or we're talking about each other in terms of our peer group. It's all the same. We, in order for our relationship to have long-term substance, to last, we have to work at it. And we do, you do, I do. We can't keep waiting for the other person to work on the relationship. That's not what makes it work. Cultivating a relationship, which is this whole principle, I'm speaking to you personally. I think it's imperative that you as an individual work towards cultivating those relationships around you, and not wait for the other person to do it. And that, quite honestly, we can all relate to this. If you remember the movie, it's become a Christmas classic now, Home Alone. The whole story is about the grandpa that lives next door to the young boy that's left at home. Everybody's scared of him and they think something's really creepy about him. Well, come to find out, when the little boy goes to at the end of the movie, goes to church, he sees the old man sitting in the pews, and they start having a conversation, and he finds out that the old man got into an argument with his son and hasn't talked to his son in 20 years, and he's there to watch his daughter or his granddaughter practice in the choir, but they don't talk anymore. And what's the point about that? Well, in order for relationships to work, we have to work at them. And if we're going to be stubborn and we're going to, dig our heels in the sand and say, I'm going to wait for the other person, you might be like this old man from Home Alone and be waiting for forever. And it's just not the way to build relationships. So I'm going to challenge you individually out there to work on yourself and work on cultivating relationships, building that bridge of understanding from yourself, right? Making that decision, I'm going to start that relationship and build it from that person out back to you. And that's what cultivating relationship is all about. So how do we do that? What are some ways in which we can cultivate relationships? Well, let me share with you a couple. I mentioned Terry Paulson to you earlier, and Dr. Terry Paulson is a clinical psychologist. He is an expert, an absolute expert on managing conflict, on building relationships, and that's what he's really, he speaks all over the world on. And Terry says to buy tickets. Now, he says this in a funny way. He's talking about us as individuals, buy tickets to a season premiere, to buy tickets to a baseball game, to buy tickets to events all throughout the country, and that's one of the things that he suggests that we do. And so, why? Because if you buy tickets, you're going to go to the baseball game, you're going to go to the theater, you're going to do those things because you bought tickets to it. And so what's he really saying here? He's saying to make time for your relationships. You've got to set aside the time in order for those relationships to prosper. And so if it's your spouse, you buy tickets. You go buy tickets for the movies, or more so than the movies. He's really talking about like season tickets. So that no matter how mad you are at each other, you're still going to go because you've got tickets. Build in the time. And we've all heard that many times, build in date night and all those other things. But it's true. And I'm going to give you another example of this. Do it with your kids. Once per month, a special time where you spend one-on-one time with them. And one of the easiest ways Dr. Paulson says to do this is pick their birth date. And the birth date each month is say they're born on the 13th of the month. That's the day each month that you have a one-on-one time with that child. So that's a really, really good idea as well. Do you make time, for your bosses, for your employees, for your key vendors? It's really all the same there. What Dr. Paulson is saying to us is we've got to make the effort. We have to make the effort, not wait for the other person to cultivate relationships. And whether or not you were a George H.W. Bush fan, that was George W.'s father when he was president, or not, there was an HBO special on him talking about his presidency and his time in politics. And one of the things he was very, very good at was remembering key things about people he'd meet. And he would write them notes throughout the year. Maybe it was their child's birthday. Maybe it was a special date throughout that year that was important to them. He would write a note to that person and say, hey, I know today's your special day, or I know it's your son's birthday, or I know your son's graduating from dental school today. Congratulations. And it was a very, very powerful tool that he used throughout his career in politics, and something he was really, really known for doing, which is absolutely my point here, is the ability to connect and to remember special things about other people. So are you doing that? Are you cultivating those relationships both with your spouse, your kids, the people you work with, the people around you? Are you doing that, or are you waiting for them to do it? Dr. Paulson says we need to do it. So let me give you some other examples of this. Each year in my family, we get a Christmas letter. And I want to share with you this Christmas letter. And I want you to hear one Christmas letter and then another Christmas letter. And then I want you then to tell me which of these two people you're going to have lunch with. Okay? By the way, this is a true story. Christmas letter number 1. Hi, everybody. It's such and such again. We had a great year this year. Steve got promoted to super special, extra special vice president of super corporate relations at our company, and we're just so proud of him. He's the youngest to receive that award in his company, and the company said that they just love him to death, and he's probably going to become president one day because they love him so much. He's just a great worker. I'm so proud of my husband, Steve. What a great year he's had in his job. Oh, and by the way, our daughter, Lindsay, she just graduated with honors from college, from Harvard, and she was a senior of the year at Harvard. And gosh, they just loved her so much there, and they're thinking about putting a plaque up in her honor right there in the business school because she was such a great student. And she's got all these different job offers. We're just not sure where she's going to work. She has so many to pick from, six-figure job offers right out of college. Gosh, we're just so proud of Lindsay. And then of course there's Stevie, our son, who's just an exceptional athlete. He just graduated high school. He was all state in everything he did. He was all state in volleyball, dodgeball, soccer, baseball, football. Gosh, he's just a great athlete. We just are so proud of him. Oh, by the way, and we went on vacation to the Bahamas this year. It was such a fun trip, and Steve won the trip because he's a super incredible employee. And so we went on the trip, and sure enough, when we got to the Bahamas, the hotel lost our reservation. Can you believe that? But the great news is when they found out how important Steve was, they put us into a penthouse at no extra charge. And guess who was right next to us? Jay-Z. It was incredible, and we got to know Jay-Z really, really well. And now we're texting each other, and he's invited us to his house, and we've become great friends. And we had just such a great year, and everything is so special about my family, and nothing ever goes wrong, and we're so incredible. And just wanted to send you this Christmas letter. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be coming into town next week. Let's have lunch. That's Christmas letter number 1. Christmas letter number 2. Hi, Lindsay. It's so nice to sit down and write this note to you. Steve and I just drove down the highway and saw a red 1986 Buick Skylark, just like that old piece of crap that you had when we went to college. Do you remember that thing? We can't even believe we were able to take that down to Florida for spring break and that it would even make it, although we had to stop 3 times and fill up the radiator so it wouldn't overheat. What a crazy car. And it reminded us as we were driving on our trip to a business meeting. We're driving right through Nashville, and it reminded us of your daughter, Ashley. What a beautiful kid she is. What a beautiful voice she has. Did she get into that special school to train her on voice lessons? Gosh, what a great kid. I sure hope she's able to follow her dream. She's just a wonderful kid. And of course, there's your son, Evan. Boy, what an athlete. We were noticing in the local newspaper that he's off to his senior year. They did that little article on him, and boy, we're gonna look forward to every Friday night's games and hope that he sets some records for the city and can get a scholarship to play football. We know that's his dream. Well, we're gonna be in town in a week or two. We'd love to sit down and have lunch. Question to you: who are you having lunch with? I know most of you in the audience are probably saying letter number 2, and I can tell you in reality, that's the type of letter we need to be writing. That's how we cultivate relationships. People don't want to hear about us. They don't want to hear about how great our life is and how wonderful things are. And it's not that those things aren't nice, and there's not that those aren't things we want to tell people about, but people are much more interested talking about what's going on in their life than they are hearing about what's going on in your life. One of the things to remember is it's much more important to be interesting or interested than interesting. Many of us are more interested in being interesting, hoping that'll make people interested in us, but it's the exact opposite. The more we are interested in somebody else, surprisingly, the more interesting we become. I'll give you another example of this, and I've talked about this in other seminars before, but Dale Carnegie was, and I talked about this in the other one, if you remember, remember I was telling you the story about him in the cocktail party and getting stuck with a scientist, and how the scientist speaking to him about all these things that he knew nothing about. All he could do was listen. Do you remember that example we talked about? And he got a letter several weeks later telling him what a great conversationalist he was because he was such a great listener. That's my point, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to be a great cultivator, if you want to have great relationships, you have to be the one that cultivates them. Don't wait on the other people to do it. Sit down every month, write down a quick note, shoot out a quick email, make that quick phone call, send that text. Do all those little things for those relationships that let the other people that you're trying to interact with know that you care about them. And that's really, at the end of the day, what great connectors do. Whether it's George H.W. Bush, whether it's Oprah Winfrey, whether it's the person down the street, whether it's your most favorite friend that always remembers you on special occasions. That's what cultivating looks like. Last point I want to make today, and this is a little bit of a shorter session than the other two, is this point about truly caring about those people that we have relationships with. In order for relationships to truly take hold, what we really find is that the people that really care about us are the people that are proud of us and are excited for us when good things happen to us. I don't think that always happens, ladies and gentlemen. I think that a lot of us, when something good happens to someone we know, maybe we get a little envious. Maybe we're a little jealous. Maybe we're wondering why good things always happen to them. But great cultivators of relationships are just as excited for your success as they are their success. I want to close with a classic example of this. This is a story from Zig Ziglar. I've mentioned him already in today's event. Or in this series at least. I think we spoke about him early on in either week 1 or seminar number 2 in this series. But one of my favorite speakers. Zig is just phenomenal. And Zig, and just to give you some perspective on how much I care about him as a mentor of my own, is his son Tom, who I'm getting ready to tell you about, who is now CEO of his company, Ziglar Incorporated, since Zig has passed away, endorsed my book. So I have a special place in my heart for the Ziglar family in terms of what they've meant to speakers around the world. But I want to share one of Zig's stories with you. You see, Zig loved to play golf. It's one of his favorite things to do. Is early in his career, the challenge that he had with the game of golf was guilt. And the reason that he had guilt is because he traveled 4 to 5 days a week in his job. And in that 4 to 5 days he traveled, when he'd get home back down to Texas, he said it would take 7 or 8 hours by the time you got in your car, drove to the golf course, played your round, cleaned up, and came back home. And he really felt guilty about spending that much time in some kind of a game that was really focused on his own enjoyment and kept him away from his family. And so he really felt guilty about playing golf because he traveled so much. And then one day he had an epiphany. He thought, maybe what I could do is I could buy my wife a set of clubs and my son Tom a set of clubs, and we'll all play golf together. And so we'll be able to enjoy golf and spend time together. This is a great idea. And everybody was excited about it when they got started. The redhead, as he calls her, his wife, got a brand new set of clubs with a pink bag and pink head covers, and everything was exciting. And his 11-year-old son Tom, got a set of golf clubs, and he was all excited, and everybody was jumping in the golf cart and playing golf. And for the first few weeks, boy, it was just a great thing. Until one day, the redhead, Zig's wife, says to Zig, she says, "Zig, you know how much I love spending time with you. It's just great. I love doing it. It's so wonderful to get out and spend time together. But you know what? Just golf's not for me. It's too hot. It's too cold. It's too wet. It's too dry. It's too windy. It's too still. The game's just not for me. But you know what? You and Tom keep playing together because it's a great way for you guys to spend time together." And there went golfing buddy number 1. A few weeks later, Zig and his son Tom, 11 years old at the time, are sitting in Zig's den, reflecting on the weekend, and Tom says, Dad, he says, you know how much I love spending time with you. He said, man, I just love it. He said, it's great to get together. He said, but boy, Dad, this game of golf, man, it's just not for me. It's just too complicated. It's too difficult. It takes too long. It's just not for me, Dad. But I really appreciate you buying me the clubs. But man, just golf's not for me. So he lost golfing buddy number 1 with his wife. Several weeks later, he loses golfing buddy number 2. And from that point forward, Zig didn't play much golf on the weekends. He traveled too much and felt guilty about it, till one day he and his son Tom were driving back from somewhere, dinner or something, and his son Tom sees a driving range as they're driving by and says to his dad, he says, "Dad, do you have your golf clubs in the trunk?" And Zig said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do." He said, "Well, why don't we stop and hit some balls? Do you want to go over and hit some golf balls?" And he said, "Sure, let's do it." So they pull into the driving range. They get a bucket of golf balls and they start hitting golf balls at the driving range. And his son Tom pulls his dad's I guess it was a 4-wood, I think, out of his bag and hits the absolute most beautiful shot he'd ever hit in his entire life. I mean, just like a pro, right down the middle. Boy, he's smiling ear to ear. He's excited. He can't believe it. He's never hit a shot like that. And he says, "Hey, Dad, you want to go play golf tomorrow?" And of course, Zig said, "Absolutely." So off they go. The next day, they're out on the golf course and they're playing golf. And I don't remember how many holes into the round it is. It doesn't matter. But his son Tom comes up to the tee on the par 4. And for those of you who aren't golfers, a par 4 simply means that if you get the ball in the hole in 4 shots, you're doing as good as what a scratch golfer should do on that hole. That's effectively what that means. So you would get it in the hole in 4. That's the goal. So they go up to a par 4, and Zig's son Tom says, "Hey, Dad, can I hit that club of yours that I hit at the driving range?" He said, "Sure, you can hit it." So he hits it, and he hits it even better than he hit it at the driving range. I mean, this thing is just dead down the middle. Couldn't be more beautiful, right straight down the middle of the fairway. They get out to the hole, or out to the fairway where his ball's at. They look out at the hole, the green where the flag's at. And Tom hits his next shot, which is the second best shot he's ever hit in his life. It's actually on the putting surface after his second shot, which he's never done on a par 4. And he's only 20 feet or so away from the hole for birdie, which means if he gets a birdie, he gets it in 3 instead of 4. And he's never had a birdie in his life. So they get up to the green, and Tom's all excited, and he lines up his putt. And he hits the putt, and man, that thing goes right in the dead center of the hole, and he jumps up in the air, and he's high-fiving his dad Zig, and they're doing all kinds of exciting dances together, and both of them just couldn't be happier. And then Zig remembers that he has about a 10-foot putt also to make birdie. And he said, I contemplated missing that putt on purpose. He said, my son Tom's never beaten me in a round or a hole of golf before. He's never gotten a birdie and never beaten me on a hole. Wouldn't it be a great thing for him to beat me on a hole? Gosh, that would mean so much to him. So maybe I should miss this putt on purpose. And as Zig was getting ready to line up his putt, he thought about that and thought, that would just be a really poor way to win, and it wouldn't be right for his son. It would feel empty if he did that. And he felt like, I better putt this and try to make it, because otherwise it just wouldn't feel the same. So Zig stepped up to his putt. He lined it up the best he could, and as fate would have it, sure enough, the ball went right in the middle of the hole to tie his son Tom. And Zig looked over at his son Tom, and he said, "Tom, I bet you weren't pulling for me to make that putt, were you, son?" And Tom looked at his dad and said, "Dad, I'm always pulling for you." Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. Isn't that what relationships are supposed to be like? Between son and father, between daughter and mother, between employee to employee, between friend to friend, between doctor and staff. Ladies and gentlemen, in order for us to cultivate relationships, we must work at those relationships. We need to make the effort to connect with those important people in our lives. We have to build those bridges of understanding from the other person back to us. Just remember all of that as we're thinking about putting this whole thing together, listening and seeking to understand others, as we talked about in week 1. Week 2, we talked about hurting people and managing conflict, and how we can talk people down from being really upset, especially when many of them come in ready to pick a fight that has nothing to do with us. This week, we talked about cultivating relationships and working on those relationships at our own level, and not worrying about the next person or hoping they're going to first be the ones to cultivate. It's first up to us. So we've got to put all that together, whether we're talking about corporate office and front desk or clinical or field coordinators or office managers. We've got to build this connection and this trust amongst each other. And I can't wait for the other department or the other person to do it. It starts with me. As Zig Ziglar said many times, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. And I have to be the one to do that. Remember, it's more important to be interested than interesting. Constantly work on those listening skills. Remember that those hurting people hurt others, and relationships only work if you work at them. And last, as I mentioned before, it all starts with me. So thank you, everybody, for listening. team leaders, facilitators, what I'd like you to do after we shut this down is ask your team what stood out to them about today's event. What are they going to do differently to cultivate relationships with your existing patients, with each other, with people in their lives? What things are they going to do differently as a result of understanding that I must cultivate relationships if I want to truly be a great connector? Thank you so much. Thanks again. I can't wait to talk to you again. We're going to get together one more time, week 4, just to kind of put everything together. I'm going to hopefully get everybody's action plans by the time we get to that point, and we'll summarize what different offices are going to do and how they're using these points to be a better practice. Thank you so much. Have a great week. Take care.